I'm here today with Tom Brokaw, one of the great journalists and news anchormen of the past half-century. From 1983 to 2005, he was an anchor of the NBC Nightly News and currently works for NBC as a special correspondent. He is also a prolific author with 7 books, including his latest, A Lucky Life Interrupted, which chronicles his personal battle with cancer. Tom, welcome.
Thank you, Quinn. Good to be with you.
Growing up in South Dakota, what were the important life lessons that you learned from your family?
Well, I grew up in a working class family. Neither of my parents had gone to college. My mother should have gone, but she came out of high school in the Depression. There just wasn't any money for it. My dad left school in the 3rd grade because he was kind of abandoned by his family, but he was a mechanical genius. If it had a motor, he could run it. If it was broken, he could fix it. And my entire life was shaped by working class families. You had to be able to do the job, and it wasn't just talking your way through it, which I do now. It was kind of a hands-on culture in which I grew up. And people measured you at the end of the day by what you had accomplished. And I think that was always very helpful to me in the kind of work that I do now. Wherever I would go in the world, I would think back to those people who wore hard hats, carried lunch buckets. Mothers worked as clerks in stores. And every day was to try to get ready for the next day. And that's been the mode of my life.
That leads me to my next question. What was education like in South Dakota, and what were you like as a student?
Well, education was actually a primary part of the growing up there because that area was settled by Northern Europeans, the Germans and then the Scandinavians, and that was always critically important to their culture. So even though we came from a working class background, the schools were the central focus of the community. I was a good student. I probably could have worked a little harder than I did, but I could kind of get through what I needed to, still play ball, be active in extracurricular activities. That came to a halt when I went to college at the University of Iowa because there were all these terrific co-eds, and I thought at that point in my life I could kind of float through. But when I got to Iowa, the standard was a lot tougher, and I went off the rails for a couple of years. That was the next most important thing in my life in terms of learning from failure. Once you learn to fail, you learn how easy it is to do that, and to get back is not easy. But someone you know well, Meredith, was the one who reeled me in and got me back on the straight and narrow.
And what was your support system like for you in college?
Well, mostly people, unfortunately, indulged me. You know, I was kind of quick on my feet, and I could MC things. I was working in radio and television when I was a sophomore in college. I was a good writer. So they let me get away with more than I should have. I needed somebody to kind of stand in front of me and say, wait a minute, you're not doing the kind of hard work that's going to be required to get a degree here. I still have a lot of friends from that time, and they say, well, I think you overstated how far you went off the rails. I don't think I did. And Meredith was the first one to come to me and say, I don't know what you're doing with your life, but you're wasting my time and all of your friends' time by just hanging around. So that was a turnaround moment for me.
What has your support system been like since 2013, since your diagnosis?
You know, one of the reasons we're friends is because our families have the same attitude. We're all in this together. You know, we're not just a family. On the good times, you can be a family during the tough times as well. And my family was really there for me. My new line that I've learned about cancer is that if one member of the family gets cancer, everybody gets cancer because it preoccupies everyone 24 hours a day. Meredith stepped right in, organized my meds, kind of was my tough cop standing in front of me and saying, no, you're not going to go get on that airplane, you're going to stay home and rest. And we've got a lot of things we have to deal with. Jennifer Brokaw is a physician. She became my ombudsman and consigliere. She knew how to interpret what the doctors were saying. She would do additional research, take notes. My middle daughter, Andrea, and her husband are hipsters. They're in the digital world, so they would keep me abreast of what was going on there. And our youngest daughter, Sarah, had given birth as a single mom to this darling first little boy we've had in the family. And so Archer, just by his very presence, would give me a lift. So we were all in this together. I was the one with cancer, but in a way, they shared the burden.
Do you have a different perspective now on life than you did before?
I do. When I came midway through my 73rd year, when I was diagnosed. And I think before that, I thought I was kind of invulnerable to what happens to people as they age. I knew that birthdays were coming and going, but I was still biking across South America. You know, I was climbing mountains and fishing in tough rivers. And then bang, I get hit with cancer. And it does focus your vulnerabilities a lot. And so I learned from that. You know, one of the things that I say in life, by the way, Quinn, is that there's no such thing as a humble anchorman. It just doesn't come with the job. But if anything, it did make me more humble, and it made me more aware of what other people go through. I never fail when I go to one of the hospitals and look at other patients and think, God, I'm not in that position. You know, at least I think I'm going to emerge from this. When I see parents with a child with cancer, I can't tell you how it moves me. Or I see someone my age who plainly is not going to recover as quickly as I have. These are life's lessons that are very important.
Looking back on your career now in journalism, is there a single person or event that stands out to you that you've learned from?
Well, I think a couple of events do. One is more recently, the biggest single event I covered was 9/11. Because I was on the air 24 hours a day for 5 days. We didn't know what was going to happen next. It took everything I knew as a journalist, as a citizen, as a father, as a husband, to get through that time and to be, if you will, a reassuring presence to the American people. They were all tuned in, and we were going through this horrific experience simultaneously. And what I said to my colleagues, don't speculate, just say what we know. And don't try to go beyond what it is that we know, and have a tone of reassurance in your voice, if you will, while we're on the air. Before that, it was the collapse of the Soviet Union and Tiananmen Square in China, those two big countries going through this revolutionary change. And then before that, covering Watergate. I came to Washington not very well known, but I'd had a pretty good record in California, and I was able to hold my own. And your dad, Ben, put his arm around me at one point and said, you know what you're doing, kid? And it made a huge difference in my confidence, and I felt like I'd been accepted. That was really important to me.
You write a lot about your love of the outdoors. What does being in nature mean to you?
I grew up, first of all, on the prairie. And people who have not been in the Great Plains have no idea. Like in 1950, we didn't have the interstate highway system yet even. And I would get up in the small towns in which I lived and look out across the prairie, and 100 years earlier, those prairies had been covered by bison and elk and wolves and the Sioux Nation. That was their territory, just 100 years before I was 10 years old. And I was always conscious of that. And when I went down to the Missouri River, where I spent a lot of my spare time, I was on the very river that Lewis and Clark came through. You know, and they were discovering antelope for the first time. No one had ever seen an antelope. Prairie dogs had not been seen before. All new kinds of flora and fauna that they were keeping track of. I had a boat, and I had a gun, and I had a trap line, and I fished. So I was reliving, in a way, the Lewis and Clark era. And that kind of primal experience, I think, does give you a perspective on the world.
That leads me to my next question. What do you plan to do next, and what does the future hold for Tom Brokaw?
You know, it's a very good question. I want to write more. I've decided that, you know, I've been doing television most of my life and writing more in the back third of my life than I had before, so I like writing. I want to spend more time with people that I really care about. You made the cut. And I want to reflect more on where we're going as a country and as a society. I don't want to be just the journalist who's out chasing that day's story just for the sake of it. You know, after 50 years in this business, I have formed some ideas about what's in the best interest of our republic, and I'm trying to engage other citizens in a dialogue about that.
Do you think you'll continue to be in the outdoors at all?
The outdoors is so important to me. I'm going to be in Montana this summer, and I'll get up at 6 in the morning, and we have a mountain stream that runs right through our territory, through our ranch. I go out, the temperature is probably 48 degrees in the water, and I go in first thing in the morning. And I'm the only one on the ranch who will do that. But I tell you, it wakes me up. It gets all my cells going at once. And I come out of there pretty refreshed. I'm with my dog, Red, the Labrador, and I go in and do some stretching exercises and have a little breakfast, and then Red and I take off across the foothills and try to see what game is out there. We see antelope in the morning, or elk, or deer, or maybe a wolf has passed through the night. And it reminds me that the primal life has been here forever, and we can all learn from that.
Tom, thank you so much for sharing your time with me today. I really appreciate it.
Quinn, it's always a pleasure being in your company.
Tom's book, A Lucky Life Interrupted, can be found in any store where books are sold. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Quinn. It's great to be here.